Though a snowstorm looms for Pennsylvania this weekend, last night on Snow Risk, Rob pointed out that central Pennsylvania has been in somewhat of a snow drought this winter. That resonated with me, and I'm sure others in this part of the state, because it seems like that's been the case not just this winter, but for quite a few winters. So I thought I'd run the numbers. Let's start with the average snowfall over the last 10 winters for about a dozen places spread across the state. Now, these numbers are rounded to the nearest inch just to keep things simple. So I would consider this sort of recent memory, the last 10 winters. Now, to provide context for these numbers, here are the so-called snowfall normals. These are based on averaging 30 years of data. Specifically, the last 3 complete decades, the 1990s, 2000s, and 2010s. It becomes apparent right away as you compare the top and bottom numbers that the most recent 10 years have simply not been very snowy compared to the longer-term averages. All of the 10-year averages are less than the 30-year normals. The difference perhaps most evident in Erie, where the 30-year average is above 100 inches and the 10-year average well below 100, and in State College, where the longer-term normal was in the 40s, but the 10-year average is in the 20s. So here's the ratio of the 10-year average to the 30-year normal, multiplied by 100 to turn it into a percent. In both State College and Philadelphia, the last 10 years have brought less than 70% of the longer-term normal snowfall, with Scranton, Williamsport, Somerset, Erie, and Pittsburgh less than 80%. Another way to think about the relative lack of snow in the last 10 winters is to ask, in how many of those 10 was snowfall below the 30-year average? And here's that answer. The 9s in State College and Somerset and the 8 in Williamsport certainly reinforce the notion that the recent winters have just not been that snowy, as does that 8 in Erie, for those along the lakeshore used to lots more lake-effect snow. State College is an interesting case, in part because we've been measuring snowfall here on campus a long time, since the 1890s. This is a plot of what's called the 10-year running average of winter snowfall. Simply put, this is the average of the last 10 winters computed every year, then just connect the dots. So you have a running picture of what the previous 10 winters were like. So, for example, the highest point on this graph represents the winter of 1969-1970. That tells us that the previous 10 years, essentially the decade of the 60s, was the snowiest 10-year period on record in State College. Now locate the lowest point on this graph. There it is. It's the very last point on the graph, which tells us that the last 10 winters in State College represent the least snowy 10-year period on record here. Turns out that the last 10 years have also been the least snowy 10-year period on record at Williamsport and Harrisburg as well. Stay tuned. We'll be back in a moment with more.